Well, first of all, I think my generation, globally, has caused a crisis for the world. If one looks at the outcomes today, the perfect storm that we have of an economic crisis, the ecological crisis, the financial crisis, the job crisis, the food crisis, and the intersect of this. The only scenario I see of the future is a growing global apartheid that divides the global rich, who are an absolute minority, probably 1% of the world, and the overwhelming majority of poor people, who are the 99%. I think that's an indictment on my generation. Will we find a solution? Absolutely not. Because it's my generation today that dominates the global institutions. It's my generation that will run the United Nations, and run the WTO, will run the major multinationals, will run political governance around the world. Are we going to say that we did wrong? Unlikely. So that is why, for me, the only solution that will change the world that we live in, that will design the world that we want, not the world that vested interest want, or my generation want, the world that the youth want, is the youth themselves. And it takes me back to my teenagehood and my meeting with Steve Biko, who inspired me and was able to challenge my anger that I felt against apartheid in a way that said, there is an enemy that you have. What he said was that, we have nothing to lose but our chains. That we can continue to accept this injustice and we'll die being slaves, or we can stand up, and we may die in the process, but we'll die an honorable death. That's what changed me. It wasn't, someone leading me. It was making me a leader in my life, and me understanding what I got to do. And that's the challenge of youth today, is that they can't find solutions somewhere else. They can't look to leaders and think that they are going to lead them, because all these leaders are tied to vested interests. So what the youth of today have got to do is identify with the struggles that they're fighting. And what today unites these youth is these crises. Because whether you are in Spain, and even if you have an education, or whether you are in Montreal, or whether you are in Mumbai, or Johannesburg, or Diepsloot, you are linked by one thing, that the world that has been designed is going to exclude you. And unless you bring it back to the critical values of social justice, of human dignity, of the way in which we can build social inclusion, the way in which we can build sustainable growth that not only protects human rights, but protects the fact that our planet has limits. And I think that it's youth themselves, in their conversation, that are going to find the solutions. And when they build their power, like we built our power as young people from the generation of 1976, that was able to defeat apartheid in the trenches, and which allowed outstanding and extraordinary leaders like Nelson Mandela to do what was the right thing to do. Unless we have the youth themselves organizing themselves, I do not see us making progress. I think young people need their own political narrative, as much as we had a political narrative from the 1976 generation. And I think the current narrative is, you find it extremely fragmented and divided. And there are people who stand on podiums, demagogues, who really only represent their own individual interests of accumulation, and obscene accumulation, and who claim to represent the youth. I think the youth must speak for themselves. And that's why they need to organize themselves about what is the society they want. Part of my role is to encourage those young voices. And there may be things I disagree with what they say, but we should have an attitude to say we should defend to death the right of young people to speak for themselves. And I think we need to get rid of this discourse that the youth, in a sense, represent a deficit in society. In fact, that deficit in society that we talk about is a result of what we have done. Because of the way in which we've designed education in this country, the vast majority of young people are coming out of 12 years of education with very little skills no jobs, and unlikely to have a job in their lifetime. That's our fault. And now you think that we are going to come back and say that we have the solution. Are we going to even recognize and state we made a mistake and we apologize for it? We will not do that. And they will criticize us because we have made mistakes. I have made mistakes as a minister in the first cabinet. I accept that. And I'm sorry about that. But that's why I contribute my life now to saying, how do I rectify those mistakes? And the only way I can see is supporting young youth leadership to find their own path to the type of democracy they want to enjoy. Around the world I go, and I am astonished at the number of examples, positive examples, where youth themselves have created pathways out of poverty, pathways out of the negative circumstances that face them. And that's the thing about young people. They have a vibrancy, they have a dynamism, they are resilient. And so we should be looking at how we accelerate these pathways. How every human being, particularly young person, is an idealist, or potentially an idealist. They have an aspiration to become successful. So we should make that a reality by creating the type of support that makes individuals aspire, become ambitious, and succeed in their lives. Many of our youth initiatives around the world, I see, are designed more to protect my generation and keep power in my generation than see that these are pathways where youth have got to find their own leadership. We want to control youth. And I think that's the failure. It's all about how do we create youth organizations that serve our interest as my generation. And I think that's when we let go that we will see a change in how the world is governed. It's to claim their right in society. It's to express themselves and let no one take away their voice. And I think, most importantly, a focus on the issue of education. That the young people of South Africa and the world deserve and have a right to the type of education that creates the opportunity, that gives them livelihoods, that gives them skills, that gives them a value system which can not only protect their own interest, but protect the interest of our planet.